What's going on, everybody? Mortym here, and I'm pretty excited to let you guys know that I have been looking at updating some of my builds for Morrowind as it comes up. So, unfortunately, because Morrowind, all the PTS stuff is under NDA right now, I can't actually show you that. So, some of these changes I'm going to tell you about, but I can't physically show you them because the PTS is under NDA. So I can't make footage of any of that stuff. But that said, all of the stuff that I will be mentioning to you, I have tested on the PTS. I just can't actually make footage of it there. So that said, when Morrowind launches, I will likely come back to this and actually get the gear I'm talking about to you guys together, and so I can actually show it to you with those sets. That said, I have tested it, and even with the gear I'm using currently, this works really well. I was able to clear Veteran Maelstrom Arena with it. So it's working pretty well. So diving right into it, I'll just start going over some of this stuff here. Obviously, we have a Khajiit. I like the Khajiit because you get the extra weapon critical. Now, alternatively, you can use a Red Guard if max stamina is more your speed. Personally, I just prefer the extra crit strike, but Red Guard, maximum stamina, feel free to do that as well. So for attributes, I like a 12-52 split for stamina and health. That's just where I'm comfortable at. I know 60 and 4 is pretty common. I just do a lot more soloing than most people, so I prefer a little bit more health. So 12 and 52 is where I'm comfortable. But again, if you want to put a few more points into stamina instead, that is also very doable. So our Mundus Stone is the Thief. I haven't tried this with Twiceborn Star, but I would imagine you'd pick up the Warrior if you did. Personally, I'm not really into Twiceborn Star that much. Most of the time, I just feel like you could do better with something else. But that said, the Thief, if Twiceborn Star is your thing, you might look at doing the Warrior, I suppose. But for right now, it's just the Thief. So, jumping straight into skills here. Now, this is where it actually gets a little interesting. We're actually running dual wield on both bars. Now, if you really want to, you can use a bow on the back bar. But the thing is, I'm not doing PvP here. In most cases, the 9 meters that most of the melee stuff like Steel Tornado and Hurricane jump up to is more than sufficient. Even in Veteran Maelstrom Arena, I really didn't have a problem with not having a ranged attack. I was able to clear every stage without it really being an issue. But that said, if you really feel more comfortable with a bow, I mean, feel free. All you'd have to do is swap out Deadly Cloak with Volley, and it would work out pretty well for you. So, with that said, jumping into what I'm actually using here. For our first bar, we are using Blood Craze for the first one, just because it is a nice heal. I enjoy it. It's a bleed as well, which the damage is always nice, but the big reason we picked this one specifically is for the health. You can also use Rending Slashes. Critical Surge heals you pretty well. This is just to give you a little bit extra. So feel free to use either morph, but I like Blood Craze. Now, if you're paying attention to the patch notes from Morrowind, Blood Craze is about to get a 60% resource cost increase. So this is actually going to jump up to a little over 1,000 or so cost in the future. I believe actually after they get rid of all the cost reduction, it's a little closer to 1,500. For our second ability, we are using Rapid Strikes. The alternative to this is the one that heals you at the end of all the hits, but this one gives you 3% increase in damage for each one. I just like the extra damage. For our third ability, we are using Evil Hunter from the Fighters Guild skill line. Mostly for the weapon critical. Obviously, the other one doesn't really help us out that much, and we're not going to waste stamina on activating this. So, and then for our last one, we are using, or our fourth one rather, we are using Critical Surge from the Stormcalling tree, which increases our weapon damage by 20% and heals us for a crap ton. The heal on this is honestly ridiculous. And then for our last one, we are using Steel Tornado from Dual Wield. This is just really good. You spin around, hit a bunch of people, deals 100% more based on their missing health. And then for our ultimate on this bar, we're using Thrive in Chaos. Slash deal a crap ton of dot damage over 8 seconds, healing you for 50% of the damage done, as well as increasing your damage done by 5% for each enemy hit up to a maximum of 30. I would tell you, even if you hit just one person with that, it still does a lot of damage. You still get a bit of a buff. So even then, it's a really good way to go. For our back bar, like I said, use a bow if you want. Literally, the only thing you'd really need to change is Deadly Cloak out for Volley, and then you might consider dropping something like maybe Evil Hunter off this bar for like a poison injection as well. But we're using dual wield because it's super fun and it works. So Deadly Cloak, because I like to solo, I was doing VMA with this stuff. The physical damage itself for this one, you might consider using Razor Caltrops, but one of the reasons I was updating these builds is because, again, if you're following all the Morrowind changes, the biggest one by far is resources. And basically they're making it where sustained builds aren't really a thing anymore. And what I mean by that is they're getting rid of Warlord, which reduced resource costs across the board for stamina by like 15% if you had it maxed out, as well as some of the different things you could do to sustain things. And because of that, I don't really want to use Razor Caltrops if I don't absolutely have to. If I can find something with comparable damage that I can use, then I will. And Deadly Cloak is really good. It does similar damage. Now, that said, I have to be standing right next to things, whereas Razor Caltrops has a huge area of effect, of course. But then again, I'm using Hurricane, and because I'm with a dual wield bar, it's my goal to be right next to things. And the things that I'm not next to, if you jump down to the end of the bar here, I've got Immobilized with Beast Trap. It's not like I need to be over there, because this is dealing dot damage. There's a pretty good chance I'm within range of Hurricane, and then if nothing else, because I'm not using this bar consistently, I'll switch over and hit him with Steel Tornado as well. So, believe it or not, Caltrops isn't really necessary for this, but if you really just insist upon using it, feel free. But again, because of all these resource changes, I was looking for something with a much reduced stamina cost, because Caltrops cost like 6k stamina with the reductions. So after those reductions are gone, I imagine it's going to be a little closer to 7,000 or 8,000. So and that's just too much to me in that scenario. Now, the second skill on this one is Hurricane from, again, the Storm Calling tree. And Hurricane is awesome, of course, grows in size, and hits everything around you. And then we are using Evil Hunter again just to keep our crit strike buff across the board. And then, lastly, we're using Dark Deal. Now, before all these changes to Morrowind, you didn't really need to use Dark Deal if you were set up properly, because your resource costs could be basically mitigated through gear and stuff, where you could infinitely sustain yourself. And now that that's not really an issue, Dark Deal becomes basically a necessity for stamina versions. And what you can do here, so what you can do here is you just activate it. It actually takes about a second to cast itself, and that's not changing in Morrowind. It's the same. They did add a 0.2 second thing at the end where you can't cast anything again, but that's actually in line with several other skills, so you shouldn't really notice that. That said, this is the other magic ability we're using besides Critical Surge, and it will also restore our resource as well as just straight up heal us. And because of the resource mitigations and things like that, Dark Deal is a great way to keep that in line. And then the last ability, like I said here, was Lightweight Beast Trap, which unlike rearming, we can throw this one wherever we want it. And because we are using dual wield in both, you don't necessarily need to use the lightweight version, but it will help you out a lot. Basically, to keep things from sneaking up on you, you can use it to throw down on portals that are spawning in VMA that are physical guys. That way you can basically control the battlefield around you. You don't need to be everywhere at once. And it also does a crap ton of dot damage, and it gives you minor force, which increases critical damage, which is always a great way to go. And then for the ultimate, Flawless Dawnbreaker, the version that stuns, I actually just realized I didn't have it completely morphed out recently, which made me feel a little stupid because I did a bunch of stuff without realizing that. But yeah, Flawless Dawnbreaker, the version that does the stun, is always really good, simply because it's nice to have a stun. So, all of that out of the way, just to explain some of the choices here. So when it comes to the passive effects, we wanted critical, the Evil Hunter specifically, with the Lightweight Beast Trap, in addition to maintaining our crit strike as well. It's nice to have that with the bar that has Dawnbreaker, because One of the things about the Fighters Guild is, which one is it? Oh yeah, here it is on Slayer. You'll increase your weapon damage by 3% for each Fighters Guild ability slotted. So while it's only 3% on this one, which is fine because this is where we're doing most of our damage, when we switch over to our AoEs and we throw down our lightweight beast traps, we actually get a 9% bonus because we have all those things on the same bar. And then beyond that, it's pretty straightforward. As far as class passives and stuff for stuff like this goes, you want to use all of them, of course, but we use things like Implosion, and then we get extra weapon damage and spell damage for using our Sorcerer abilities, which we're only using a couple with this build, so we don't get a lot of benefit off of this one, but still, it's something to keep in mind. And then we get increased physical and shock damage. Now, I mentioned these passives specifically because when you look at these, it's physical and shock specifically, whereas a lot of other stand builds have versions of poison and stuff, but in order to trigger, especially Implosion, you have to be using shock damage. And I mention that because when we come over here to weapons, I prefer to use the shotgun chance just because I want to give those things as many chances to proc as possible. You can use poison, there's nothing really stopping you, it's not going to make that much of a difference. But for that reason, I like to use shock, plus it's a little more thematic to what the Sorcerer is all about, so if you care about stuff like that, that's a thing. But feel free to use poison if you like. So as far as builds, the armor and stuff goes, what I'm using right now is actually Spriggan's and Hunding's Rage, which by itself works super well. I didn't want to invest too much in gear at the moment with Morrowind coming up. Obviously, there's new stuff. So I'm going to go over what I have, and then I'm going to go over what I was using in the PTS and kind of explain some of the differences there. So right now we're using Spriggan's, like I said, and Hunding's Rage for the, just because it's easy to get a hold of. But obviously there's stuff better than Hunding's Rage these days. By the way, just a quick thing about Spriggan's. If you do the 3 jewelry pieces of it and you don't have a lot of cash, feel free to just pick up the blues, because they're 1 to 2k as opposed to like 20 plus for the epic versions, and the only thing you're really losing is like 100 stamina. You can still put the 174 enchants on this if you really wanted to. Now, because we're using the 5-piece here, we've got Lecky's weapons for the extra weapon damage on that stuff. Now, for the PTS server, what I was using instead of Hunding's Rage was a new set that's coming out called Defiler. Now, 2 through 4, it's basically the same set. It's when you get down to the 5-piece that it's different. When you deal damage, you have a chance of spawning a Defiler, and it does about 10 to 11k with your buffs of poison damage, as well as stuns a target for 5 seconds. And it spawns all the time, like pretty consistently. It spawns very often. So with that, it deals more damage than this weapon does for weapon damage does for starters. So I replaced the Hunding's Rage set with that. Now, alternatively, you can drop the Lecky's and use Spriggan's weapons, and then use the Spriggan's slots that you were using for armor to pick up, say, Veladreth's or Celine's head and shoulder sets. Both of those work really well. You get a lot of damage out of those. But if you have the cheap version, or you just haven't gotten around to getting those head and shoulder pieces, you can use the Lecky's split and then use weapon damage on one. I forget the exact enchant name, but just know that it increases weapon damage and spell damage by so much for 5 seconds. Now in this first bar, I like to use Sharpened, of course, for all of that extra penetration. In combination with Spriggan's, it gets you pretty much where you need to be. Especially if these were gold versions, it would put me right about 9,000. For the back bar, I use the extra, just precise. No real reason for that, I was just kind of testing it out. You can certainly use Sharpened on this back bar if you prefer. It's not going to make that much of a difference. For the most part, I just figure with me spawning all this stuff, I could try having just a... I believe it comes out to about 6% more crit. Yeah, on that back bar. But like I said, you could use Sharpened as well. It's not going to make too much of a difference, though, because we're just on this back bar to throw up things. Throw up a few AoEs, drop Lightweight Beast Trap, occasionally use Dawnbreaker for a stun, and then we're just switching right back. This is our primary damage bar. So there's no necessarily need to have Sharpened on those back two. Alternatively with this, if you're not using the head and shoulder sets I was talking about, you could certainly use Maelstrom for these as well instead of Leckies. That would also be a great way to go. But with all of those sets, I was doing really well. Now, with all of those resource changes in mind, I'm going to talk about some of the champion points here, but keep in mind that what I'm using right now and what I'm going to tell you about are the key difference here. So, lucky for us, the mage stuff doesn't really change for this build. The only thing it changes is the amount of the percentage increase on mighty and precise strikes. It's pretty much the same as far as putting points into them. However, it's going to drop from 25% down to 15% on the bonuses. And then we're not putting a lot of into piercing because we're using Spriggans and sharpened, so we don't really need the extra. But any points you have extra you can throw in here, that'll do pretty well. So for the warrior and the mage stuff is where it gets a little crazy. So right now, obviously, we're using Hardy and Elemental Defender. Again, you'll still put a lot of points into those, but the percentage is going down. It's going down to 15 instead of maxing out at 25. You're still going to put about the same. You can drop... just real quick to explain. The way they're changing champion points with Morrowind is they're front-loading a lot of it. So, like, the back half of the 0 to 100 scale is going to give significantly less. And because of that, you're only going to put about 60 into Hardy and Elemental Defender, which is actually going to give you plenty because, like I said, they're front-loading it. So you'll still get the vast majority of the benefit. And then you're going to come over to the Steed, and they're changing Ironclad from reducing all of these snares and stuns and stuff into reducing damage from direct damage attacks. And you'll put about 40 points into that, which again, it's all front-loaded, so you actually get a huge bonus from just those 40 points. And then you'll put everything that's left into Quick Recovery, which still does the same thing. They just, again, toned it down from 25% at max to, I believe it's 15. But it's front-loaded, so all those extra points, you still get quite a bit. Now, the Thief is where it sucks. Right now we're using Warlord, of course, because it reduces stamina cost of spells and abilities. However, this is getting changed to something else entirely, something that reduces the cost of Break Free, and then Tumbling will continue to reduce the stamina cost of Roll Dodge, but the Break Free part will be moved over here to where Warlord is now. So you'll put a few points in that, but the primary thing here is you'll come over here to Tenacity, which increases the amount of magic and stamina your heavy attacks restore. And you'll actually dump a full 100 points into that. And then I recommend about 60 into Mooncalf to keep your stamina recovery up. And then split what's left in between Warlord, or whatever the new one is called, I can't remember the name of it offhand, and Tumbling. As long as you keep up Tenacity, so you'll pepper up a few heavy attacks, and that'll actually keep your stamina up a lot because you're increasing the amount of magic and stamina you're restoring. So between all of those things, your stamina should actually stay pretty good, even coming into Morrowind. Like I said, I actually play tested some of this with the sets I was talking about, and I consistently had really good stamina. I honestly didn't have too much of a problem with it. If you go crazy and burst, you just double back, and that's what you're using Dark Deal for. Usually there's a point where there will be some sort of break, like especially in VMA, there's usually cadences to things. You'll have a moment to break away and use Dark Deal and restore some of your stamina while you're standing around doing essentially nothing besides reapplying buffs. So things like that. So that's pretty much the bulk of how it works on paper, I guess, is a way to put it. But now, just to show you guys how some of this stuff actually plays out. Alright, so I figure there's probably no place better to show you guys some of this stuff than Veteran Maelstrom Arena, since that's where I did a lot of the testing at. So, you'll definitely want to use your lightweight beast trap to trap things. It'll deal damage to them, of course, but the main thing is keeping them off of you. So, obviously we're not going for like super high score here. But basically you'll just put up your AoEs, make sure you keep Critical Surge up to keep yourself healed, and then you'll switch back to your main bar to use Blood Craze and Rapid Strikes to do most of the damage. Now, when things are spawning in, of course, you just drop down your lightweight beast trap. And that's pretty much the rotation from there. As you can see, you'll do a crap ton of damage just with the setup I have now, which is pretty solid. So moving on to the last boss here, I can show you guys kind of how it works against more powerful enemies. Alright, so on bigger bosses, it's essentially the same thing. You'll keep your buffs up, you will hit with Thrive and Chaos, and basically after that you'll just spam your rapid strikes. And you'll do quite a bit of damage this way. Not just to the boss, of course, but the things around them as well. As you can see, that guy will pretty much die on our AoEs. This guy's actually a little on the slow side, to be honest, as far as killing these guys goes. But as you can see, you still do plenty of damage. If we had our gold weapons and not just the epic ones, we would be doing fantastic right here. But just like that, they all go down pretty easy, obviously between the title and stuff, and I can show you guys where I actually finished it at the very end. I didn't realize I was going to finish it, so I didn't think to record it, but I did finish it with this build. So that's pretty much all of it. I hope you guys enjoy it. Like I said, I did test a bunch of it on the Morrowind PTS, so it does work there as well. When I get a chance to actually get some of that gear and I'm not under NDA, I will absolutely reshoot some of that and show it to you guys again. But as I'm going through some of these builds and getting them ready, I just kind of wanted to share some of that information with you guys going forward. So I hope you guys found this informative. If you did, please subscribe. But that said, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to follow me down on my social media links below. But have a great day either way, guys.